Blue horizons. Coral atolls, palms wafting in the ocean breeze. Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan named the Pacific Ocean for its peaceful seas. It helped that he arrived outside typhoon season in 1520. But many military and political leaders believe a storm is coming, with the Pacific soon to be the setting for the defining superpower confrontation of our age. China, not Russia, is the only country on the planet capable of challenging the United States' military, economic, and political hegemony. This epic competition between the two may or may not result in open war, but the outcome of the struggle will define the future of the world and America's place in it. In preparation, successive U.S. governments have for nearly 2 decades been building alliances, arming their troops, and stocking their war chests in anticipation of the showdown. But now the Maga revolution in the White House has left the United States Pacific allies nervously asking themselves whether an America First administration that has proved so ruthlessly transactional in Europe will do the same with them. The Pacific arms race. It is a question of chilling urgency. The Pacific and Indian Oceans today are the setting of a furious arms race. On March 5th, China upped defense spending by 7.2%, the latest in a series of steady hikes designed to upgrade its air, sea, and land forces, and its neighbors have taken note. Japan is on course to double defense spending by 2027, if only to 2% of GDP, and is rapidly expanding its surface fleet. Australia, meanwhile, is reshaping its military from an expeditionary force designed to assist U.S. forces around the world into one that can project power northward in defense of the homeland, raising memories of the desperate Pacific Island battles in the Second World War 80 years ago. It is seeking nuclear-powered submarines and tooling up for what its defense industry minister Pat Conroy has called a new Indo-Pacific missile age. India's government has proposed an annual defense spending increase of 9.5%, although domestic critics have claimed most of that will be eaten up by pensions and that the challenge from China requires more. Tension is also growing around regional flashpoints. None more so than Taiwan, which Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, has openly expressed an ambition to control. China's sudden military drills in the surrounding seas already regularly disrupt sea traffic into and out of Taiwan. While this has fueled speculation about a full amphibious invasion, gray zone pressure, a partial quarantine or blockade is more likely. And for this, China has been building alliances as well as weapon systems. Along with Russia, it has been flying joint patrols of nuclear-capable bombers overseas near South Korea, Japan, and Alaska. Meanwhile, its client state neighbor North Korea has sent troops to fight in Ukraine, binding the war in Europe tightly to Pacific security. Earlier this week, China, Russia, and Iran kicked off annual joint naval drills in the Gulf of Oman, demonstrating that their alliance can project power deep into the Indian Ocean too. In all, it is a pressing challenge to a U.S.-led Pacific alliance that has been decades in the making. The lattice American concern about China and the Pacific dates back at least to Barack Obama's presidency and is widely shared by both Democrats and Republicans. In the years since, the U.S. has assembled a powerful hand. One of the lesser-noticed successes of Joe Biden's foreign policy was building what his security staff characterized as a latticework of alliances across the Indo-Pacific, replacing hub-and-spokes bilateral security pacts with a spiderweb of interlocking defense deals. The rationale, said Thomas Wright, who served as senior director for strategic planning on the Biden White House's Security Council, was to deepen our alliances in the Indo-Pacific, and to do it in a way that wasn't just better atmospherics, but actually a material increase in our collective capabilities. Wright insisted that it was important to create a situation of strength in the region that would help to shape the regional and international order, to make sure we were doing that with our allies and partners, and not just being presented with a fait accompli by China. The lattice was built on 3 foundational deals. In September 2021, America, Britain, and Australia unveiled AUKUS, a trilateral deal to supply Australia with British and US-built nuclear submarines, cementing America's commitment to Australia, looping Britain, a European ally, into the Pacific, and giving the Royal Australian Navy the capability to maintain a permanent submarine presence in the South China Sea. 2 months later, Joe Biden hosted the first-ever Leaders' Summit of the Quad, an informal alliance bringing together India, Australia, the US, and Japan. Leaders' meetings have continued, and Donald Trump is expected to attend the next summit in Delhi later this year. Officially, the Quad is a forum for 4 democracies to share technology and discuss common concerns. Unofficially, it has been described as a military security mechanism to stymie China's pursuance of national security interests in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Beijing, more bluntly, has called it an Asian NATO. The third foundation was laid in 2023 when the leaders of the US, Japan, and South Korea met at Camp David to sign a trilateral security pact designed to overcome decades of animosity between Tokyo and Seoul. That binds together 2 long-standing American allies in the Northwest Pacific, a clear response to the tightening axis between China, Russia, and North Korea. Both Japan and South Korea have increased defense spending. And on top of those 3, there are plenty of other security deals to fill in the gaps. In November 2024, the Biden administration signed a new intelligence sharing deal with the Philippines. The Philippines also gave the Americans access to several additional bases in the archipelago, including an airbase and naval facility in the far north, near Taiwan. Also last year, the U.S. Congress renewed for another 20 years a Compact of Free Association with Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands, granting the U.S. military exclusive access to those archipelagos. It amounts, Western officials say, to a significant foundation for regional stability. Diplomatic speak for containment of China's foreign policy ambitions. What Trump wants and what Trump knows. But the one thing America's Pacific allies do not yet know for sure is whether Trump means to keep the lattice intact, or even knows what it is. No one in the Trump administration has used former U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's lattice work analogy, but it's not clear if that signifies a change in approach or merely a shift in jargon. Asked last week about AUKUS, Trump did not seem to know what it was. Figures close to his administration have questioned the wisdom of supplying submarines to Australia when the U.S. Navy is struggling to meet its own commitments. Although Australia is paying handsomely for the submarines, there's a growing nervousness that Trump might for some reason declare the pact a bad deal and rip it up. AUKUS is increasingly at risk of becoming an AUK, said one diplomatic source. In Australia, they are deeply concerned about Trump's direction of travel, they added, notably since Canberra had prioritized relations with Washington over London in the last decade. China is their other main priority, so U.S. intentions there also worry them. Australia is not the only member of the lattice now worrying. In Tokyo this week, Trump set nerves jangling when he remarked that while he loves Japan, we have an interesting deal with Japan that we have to protect them, but they don't have to protect us. That's the way the deal reads. And by the way, they make a fortune with us economically, he went on. I actually ask, who makes these deals? That kind of remark should not be overplayed, say some observers of Pacific security. He's just sort of grumbling about it, but not saying anything like the revolutionary position he has mapped out in Europe and Ukraine, said Dr. Philip Shetler-Jones, Senior Research Fellow in the International Security Team at the Royal United Services Institute. If you're focusing on China, you depend on partnerships with countries around China, because without those, you just cannot maintain a military presence in the Western Pacific. In the event of a crisis on the Korean Peninsula, or Taiwan, or the South China Sea, the vast majority of the U.S. military posture is sitting in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines archipelago. But is Trump focusing on China? That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. America and China, the great debate. There is uncertainty partly because Trump has said remarkably little about China since he returned to the White House. True, he has slapped tariffs on its imports as part of his general trade war. He wants restrictions on investment and technology transfer, and he has complained about China's role in fentanyl production. For now, though, he has paid much less attention to Beijing than he has to Ukraine, Russia, the Middle East, and Canada. That leaves some Pacific allies trying to infer Trump's intentions from his appointments. The one who has attracted most attention is Elbridge Colby, Trump's nominee for Undersecretary of Defense. Colby is a noted China hawk and one of the most prominent champions of switching American resources from Europe and the Middle East in order to concentrate on the Pacific. And yet his rhetoric leaves some puzzled. At a hearing in Congress last week, he said it would be crazy to give Australia nuclear submarines if the U.S. Navy did not have enough of its own to defend Taiwan, a remark that led some to wonder if AUKUS would be cancelled. Last year, he also wrote that Taiwan isn't itself of existential importance to America. He added, "Our core interest is in denying China regional hegemony over Asia. Taiwan is very important for that goal, but not essential." Recently, he also raised hackles in Japan by saying its 2% defense spending target should be closer to 3%. Some wonder whether Colby is in fact an isolationist. The Wall Street Journal has called him a lightning rod in a fight between the Republican Party's Peace Through Strength wing and its Retreat from the World faction. Colby has rejected that suggestion, saying prescriptions are simply a realistic response to current American and allied vulnerabilities to a rapidly arming China. His purpose, he says, is to persuade Taiwan to do more for its own defense, in turn inspiring America to help it, and ultimately deterring a Chinese attack. All other Pacific allies will have to do the same, he says. That line of thinking resembles the Trumpian approach to NATO, Europe, and Ukraine. But on the eastern side of the Atlantic, that approach has thrown the continent into crisis. European governments are now seriously discussing how to manage if America fully withdraws and NATO collapses. Some are even talking about getting their own nuclear deterrent. American intentions in the Pacific may only become clear when the Pacific phony war gives way to the hot one. One theory is that Trump is clearing the decks by getting things parked, the Middle East and Ukraine as well as he can, so he can focus on China, said Dr. Shetler-Jones. We're not there yet.